there was a really good site with a house that probably was comfortable but needed a bit of a reno, buy that, subdivide, probably renovate the one on the front, sell it, build something on the back, and all of a sudden you've got a holiday house that you could probably sublet. Do your Airbnb if you wanted to sort of get right ahead, but it'd be very positively geared if you do that, if you bought the right thing in the right location.
Gav, awesome. Hey, these are all great ideas. Let's talk about challenges and risks associated with subdivision.
And a lot of that's got to do with the councils.
One more, market risk.
Subdividing land and splitting into 2 or 3 gives you more flexibility for exit strategies, whether you're choosing to hold, to sell, if you have to sell, if you have to hold. That provides you with, I guess, flexibility.
You froth it, don't you, Gav? You froth it, you love nerding out on all this type of stuff.
I'll froth if they reduce the interest rates.
Welcome to the Development Tank, powered by ReadyBuild, bringing you the best price and value in knockdown rebuild and dual occupancy projects. If you're planning a single or a dual home build, book a call with me. Just scan the QR code on your screen or visit littlefishproperty.com/call to get started. And for all the property nerds out there, head to littlefishnetwork.com/free to unlock exclusive insights, property tools, and the best online property community in the game, completely free. Let's get into the pod. Welcome back to the Development Tank, guys. Fresh off the press. Australia Day weekend's done. The rest of the year is ahead of us. 2025, let's go. Today we're going to be talking about subdividing and how we're going to increase the land value and the profits, finding margins in everything we do. That's what we do here. So please like, share, subscribe. Let's get into it, Gav. Long weekend, Australia Day weekend. Are you refreshed? How'd you go?
Yeah, great. Good to be back. Yeah, had my dancing shoes on the weekend and did a bit of relaxing yesterday, so feeling good. Pretty excited about the week ahead. It's a big reporting week. Been listening to a few podcasts as I do, and there's a lot of reporting to be done, and we're getting very close to that first meeting for the RBA.
You froth it, don't you, Gav? You froth it. You love nerding out on all this type of stuff.
I'll froth if they reduce the interest rates.
What's your tip?
Look, it's still mixed, to be honest. Like I said, I've been listening to a few potties, and they said in the last one I listened to just on the way in today, actually, saying that, a lot of commentators are forecasting mid-year, but they were thinking it might even be a little bit earlier. So they're on the fence. But they're all saying the same thing. The consensus is, yes, it's happening. It's either going to happen, start of the year or the next month or two, or mid-year.
Love it, Gav. But as we say, let's control what we can control. Let's then play their game and we'll play our game. Today we're talking about subdivision, benefits of subdividing property. Let's go through it. I think probably the first one, increase property value. That's what we do. We activate properties. We look for margin in property. A few different developments lately doing maybe our single story dual lock that essentially increases the value of the land, increases the yield of the land, and allows people to create equity and create cash flow and build their property portfolio. But what do you go to what do you see as far as increasing the property's value?
Well, historically, that's what we do as developers. We want to improve the value of the property. As we know, there's a lot of investors out there who like buy and hold, but we want to add value. And the best and quickest way to do that is to subdivide the land, because land, as we know, is probably one of the more valuable asset out of having a house and having the land. It's the land that people want. It's the land that appreciates over time. So if you can split that into 2 or 3, you're going to increase your asset over time.
I think, and when you sort of peel back to the fundamentals of it, I think the goal is, and some people come to us and sort of say, hey, I'll develop this, I'll develop that. I think the fundamentals of it are, you need to develop a block of land that is worth more cut up into multiple pieces than it is left in its entirety, in its large form. So, which usually sends us to better suburbs where multiple dwellings on that land, and that land cut into certain portions will be worth more than leaving it as one big block of land. The lesser suburbs we get out to, the time and effort spent to subdivide land into smaller blocks may not be worth the energy that's put into it.
Yeah, that's right. Like an example, just today actually, I was researching comps in Murrumbeena. We've got a cracking site there, which we're looking at putting a single house on.
Let's go.
Yep. Now, what I did find was in those comps, there were a couple of nice modern houses, but there was 2 or 3 where the land was between 1,000 and 1,200 square metres, and it's got a beautiful renovated period style home on it, luscious green gardens. They're just amazing properties. And you'd be crazy to buy something like that and chop it up, even to 2 or 3, because it's just such a beautiful home and such a great lifestyle that surrounds it on the land. As you were saying, you could look at the outer suburbs now, and as we were discussing just before, the build prices have come up the way they have. So it's really hard to find profit when you're going out too far, where the land is probably best suited to breaking up into 5 or 6 lots.
Yeah, 100%. And I think even going out to the greenfield operators, when they're looking at farmlands to chop up and that sort of stuff, it's always, all right, I'm going to chop this land up. It's going to cost this. This is what the resale value is going to be. Bang, there's a margin in it. Is there a margin in it? Isn't there a margin in it? Go too far out and the projects won't work. Come further in and they will work. As far as a lot of our clients will develop and hold as well, the increased rental returns I find is a real interesting one, because you get a block of land with maybe a typical 3-bed, 1-bath on it, rents out for $400 a week, say. Yeah. Needs a bit of maintenance, tricky to be a landlord, needs an aircon, needs a hot water service. The maintenance costs are real. Cut that into potentially 2. You might do a dual occupancy, single story, where 3-bed, 3-4-bed, that the rental for something like that brand new might be $700 to $800 potentially, maybe $900 times 2. So you're nearly quadrupling your rent and your revenue into the property. You have spent money to develop it for sure, but that yield goes up nicely because of you're able to nearly triple or quadruple your rental income. And even we can talk about depreciation schedules and those sorts of things. So taking a block of land that is costing you money in tax, property tax, and is costing you money in maintenance costs, turning it into something that is brand new, so it costs you less to maintain, and generates a lot more revenue for you to help pay for those rates and property tax items. So I find that a really interesting one that I see some of our clients do really well.
Well, ultimately, that even as a developer, I mean, that's what, as we were saying, that's what investors do. They buy and hold and keep it and build wealth over time. If you're developing and doing exactly as you say, I guess the goal, as for me as a developer, would be to be in a position where you might do a project where you have 2 or 3 properties. You keep one, sell the others. That one's more or less positively geared. Then you go and do another one. And what you're doing is you're building up your asset portfolio. So at the end of the day, at the end of the developer lifestyle, you hopefully have a whole, I guess, portfolio of properties that are providing you with an income.
Yeah, and then replace the income that you used to do and have to work for. Yeah. You get to replace that. And I love that, Gav. And I think also the trick is that you can incorporate that is when you do actually transact these ones that you're talking about. I think if you're in a position to hold for certain times when the market may not be as hot, I think if you could bide your time and wait for better markets, then you can be selling and transacting in the top of the market more often than not. I think that's a great position to be in. And once you're in a position where you have got a few going on and we're holding a few, we're selling a few, and like you said, creating a positively geared portfolio, gives you the ability to, when you do look to sell, say, hey, the market's hot, tenant's about to go, tidy it up, let's put it on the market, and just maximize every transaction you do. But they're great strategies.
Another little one that I've sort of been looking at in the background as well is, we'd all love to have a holiday house. Those people have got them, good on them. But I'm looking at, say, an area like Rye. I found a site down there. It had 2 street frontages, had no trees on it because there's lots of landscaping overlays and so forth down there. There's minimum land sizes. All of those hurdles you've got to jump over. But there was a really good site with a house that probably was comfortable but needed a bit of a reno. Heaps and heaps of backyard, another street frontage, no problem with the crossover. Is to get something like that? Yeah, that's exactly right. And buy that, subdivide, probably renovate the one on the front, sell it, build something on the back, and all of a sudden you've got a holiday house that you could probably sublet. do your Airbnb if you wanted to sort of get right ahead, but it'd be very positively geared if you to do that, if you bought the right thing in the right location. But it's also an asset that you can use every other weekend if you choose, but it will be worth a lot more money down the track as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the thing is, you do that, and if you can identify the value, like you just mentioned, renovate the front, flip the front, cut the backyard off. Often in those situations, the land you might get for nearly free.
Yeah.
And then you put the house, pay for the build. Equity's large, and like you said, very easy for it to become positively geared. Or you could short stay it for a certain part of the year, and you can keep it for you and your family to go down there, because it's not that big of a burden on you, because it's quite sort of positively geared.
Just need the tax office to lay off the land tax a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we just need to make more. Gav, awesome. Hey, these are all great ideas. Let's talk about challenges and risks associated with subdivision. So, we talk about maybe zoning, talk about councils, there's building in there, there's overlays, there's all these sorts of things. This goes back to what we do on a daily, is due diligence on any site we're looking at. What are the things we're looking for to look for a smooth ride through the subdivision process?
Yeah, look, we typically focus on certain areas, and a lot of that's got to do with the councils and their assessment process, not just their zoning guidelines, but how they interpret those guidelines, because councils can interpret the same guideline document differently depending on where we are, what sort of time it is. Yeah, so we've experienced that with Durban Council, where we were, I guess, a little bit surprised at the way they interpreted the guidelines. Still, we found a workaround and made it work. Council is always a challenging one. So yeah, like I said, choose a council that we know, or councils that we know are flexible, that want the type of development that we want to do. We're typically looking at side-by-side developments. That's the core of our business. So we know the councils that really favour that type of design. There's some councils in the the eastern corridor that they don't mind subdividing, but they only want a single house visible from the street, so they want front to backs, which for us, there's still money in those, but it's just not as easy to do as a side-by-side and to find profit. Yeah,
couldn't agree more. I think doing your due diligence before you pick your area to develop in, and like you said, if it is to do a holiday house, well, what areas are supportive and conducive to the type of development you want to do? Super important. Now, what about costs? Because we do as much due diligence as anyone, even more, but you can't foresee everything throughout this process. So evaluating risk and evaluating certain sites, looking at infrastructure, looking at where sewer, power, water, NBN's coming from, stormwater, all these sorts of things. There's only so much due diligence you can do, but what about the risks and the costs associated there, Gav?
Well, I always do dial before you dig. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Very rarely does something come up. You pay very close attention to the title in the contract, at the Section 32, because there can quite often be hidden little details in there that might set you adrift. Also then relying on your consultant network, so your designer, town planner, they're imperative to have on your team, and quite often, like I was saying before, if you know the areas you want to work in, you choose those councils. You also then choose designers that are familiar with those councils and the zoning guidelines and overlays in those councils. So they can quite often provide you very clear feedback on not just on what you intend on doing on a particular site, but also they also can have inside knowledge on the actual town planning team within the council and where they are with their interpretation of the guidelines at that time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think super important that you surround yourself, we say it a bit, surround yourself with the expertise, because all that expertise, all that knowledge is going to pour into your project if they're on your team. So there's lots of things to be navigated throughout the process, and one can even underestimate the value of the expertise as it's pouring into your project and that value is getting received. Make sure you speak to professionals and make sure you entrust them on that journey, because you can't do it alone. Yeah, love it, Gav. And one more, market risk. Again, all this stuff's good. We've got the risks of councils and infrastructure and the unforeseens. What about market risk? Because that's a real thing.
That's right. Well, subdividing land and splitting into two or 3, gives you more flexibility for exit strategies, whether you're choosing to hold, to sell, if you have to sell, if you have to hold. That provides you with, I guess, flexibility.
So everyone that's been following along appreciates that we appreciate the single house model, and those feasibilities are looking really good. The issue is it's either rent the whole thing or sell the whole thing. There's no in between. But exactly what you said, you know, depending on how many townhouses you're doing, you got the ability to sell a couple to pay down debt, keep a couple to maybe a better market.
Yeah.
So it allows you to potentially time the market, you know, the way you want to and maximize the outcome. I know you've been developing a bit yourself. Good and bad markets, you need to be able to, I guess, maybe pivot your strategy and be nimble depending on what market you find yourself in.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, I guess, where the flexibility comes in and how I've taken advantage of it, or my wife and I, where we have a project in the inner west. Did it a few years back now, finished probably close to 2 years ago, and it finished just prior to the interest rate starting to go up, but the builder was a bit late due to COVID. So when we were forecast to be selling in April, we ended up selling, or we actually ended up being handed over later in the year, and we'd had about 6 increases in the interest rate. So yeah, so the strategy was to sell both and move on to the next project. So what we did was we sold one, and we still sold for above the number in the feasibility, which is great, but you know, probably a little bit under what we could have had we sold in April. But we held on to the other townhouse, and just to see what the market would do, and that gave us, I guess, like you're saying, give us a bit of flexibility, and you know, it was pretty much positively geared with tenants in it. And now we've decided to move it on, because the property market, as we know, in Melbourne has been super flat. So we're still going to sell it for more than what the feasibility required. So we're still ahead, but probably not going to. We're probably maybe 100 unders what we could maybe get for it if we held on for a better market. But the way I see it is the market is very flat at the moment. So if I'm out buying land, which is what the intention is, you know, to sell this as quickly as possible and get in before the interest rates start to come down a bit, and we'll start to see a bit of movement in the property market. I feel that if I might be 50 to 100 under in my selling now, but I could probably buy a site for 100 to 200 unders.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's 100%. And I think based on where the market's gone, you'll probably, the one you held, you know, it'll probably be good to you, I'd imagine, based on, you know, ideally you sell that for more than you sold your first one for. Like you said, your numbers are still above, so well done. But like you said, if this is the game you're playing and you're selling and then buying in the same market, there's a real thing called opportunity cost, and sitting on the sidelines and slowing down your property investment journey isn't always the way to go either. So some great insights there. But I think when it boils down, if you can be flexible, which you were in that moment, I think anyone out there that if the market is super flat and they can hold for a bit, maybe still be active in other areas, it can pay to maybe sell one if you're in a position to sell both, but just making sure you're maximising those sales results when you look to transact.
Well, selling that one enabled us to get into another project, you know, at Service Street. So we were able to, I guess, have the opportunity to get into another project quickly, but also now I've got the opportunity to sell the other one when we choose. We could hold on to it if we wanted to, but I just don't think that holding on to it for another 2 years is going to benefit from us. I think I could make more money out of that doing a different project.
Some savvy acquisition activity, Gav.
Yeah, I know a guy in site acquisitions.
There you go. I do too. Let's go, Gav. All right, cool. Now let's wrap up with the steps to successfully subdivide your property. Now, this is what we do all day, every day. Yeah. We don't assume that everyone knows how to do this, but let's dive into it as far as the main steps. And the main steps we've come up with: assess the feasibility and due diligence, obtain the council approval, complete the subdivision process, and develop to sell or hold. Obviously, got the build in there as well. Yeah. But Gav, this is your bread and butter, assessing due diligence and feasibility. Do you want to just quickly go through with us on that, your process of how a client comes to us, and then how you get them to purchasing the property, and then obviously we kick them off with the projects team? There's
a bit of detail there, so let's just try and keep it high level. When we've got a client, the first things first is to find out exactly what their strategy is, I guess how much money they have to put into a project, and then work out not just their strategy and what they'd like to do in development, but where they want to be in 2 years, 5 years, and so forth. So depending on that will determine the type of site. But when looking at the sites, I mean, it comes down to what in very simple terms, you've got to sell a property for a certain amount. If we already know the strategy, let's just say they want to do side-by-side townhouses. We've got a rough idea what that cost is going to be to build. So we need to know exactly how much we can sell these townhouses for, and then that will determine what we need to buy it for in order to create a profit. Yeah. So work backwards a little bit sometimes, because the construction costs are high at the moment in relation to the value of new townhouses for sale. It's I guess that window or that zone or that corridor is a little narrow. That corridor is a little more narrow than normal. So looking at what we can sell for is, I guess, a priority. And then it just comes down to the fundamentals. I'm looking at schools, I'm looking at transport, I'm looking at activity centres. I'm avoiding busy roads. I'm avoiding any sort of through roads. You get down there, get on the ground, have a look around, look at the traffic. Things like, for me, just at a personal, I don't really like a speed bump out the front because cars brake and accelerate, and they rattle usually when they go over a bump. If I can avoid it, I don't like power poles out the front of the house, but it's not a deal breaker. It depends if it's a corner and you're going to be building up on the boundary and you've got a big power pole with a massive, 2 metre by 2 metre asset on the pole. That's probably a no-go.
Yeah, there's poles and there's poles.
There's poles and there's poles.
So I've got a few of those things that I like to avoid, but the fundamentals we always return to.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And doing successful due diligence and then being able to negotiate and stick to your number, do your feasibility, but also understanding your costs, because all these things are great. And the resales, like you said, super important. Someone gets too carried away with their resales, all that's just fugazi, because especially in these markets, you've got to make sure your comps are solid and you've got the multiple comps to support it. Yeah. One outlier can't set up your whole feasibility because crazy results happen. And we're not in the business of achieving crazy results. We're in the business of delivering something that's been delivered multiple times before.
Yeah, so that's understanding all those risks, which we've already covered off a lot just in the pod today, and then finding firm numbers around those costs and the risks. And then you put them into, it doesn't have to be an overly complicated feasibility. We've got a great one on the network and the masterclass course with an structural video there, and that's very, very similar to what I use in here. It doesn't need to be overly complicated, but it just needs to be accurate.
It needs to be accurate. Yeah, I agree. Because when you boil it down, not to take the shine off what we do, but you buy, you build, you sell. So that's a very basic way of looking at it. Yeah. But we buy the land, we build it, and we sell it. And those numbers need to talk to each other. They need to support each other. There needs to be a margin at the end. Lots of bits and bobs that live in between those, but from a high level, that's essentially what we do.
In a lot of cases, a lot of the numbers in that spreadsheet, a lot of those costs, they're close to known. They're pretty firm. Your build doesn't fluctuate much. We've done so many now that we know where the build rate's going to be pretty much. And yes, it's been turbulent over the last 2 or 3 years, but I can't imagine it being any more turbulent than what it has been. If anything, it's probably already leveled out and becoming a little more competitive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And when you go down our ReadyBuild path, the prices are locked in. You pay your deposit within a week, and the prices are locked in for 12 months.
So your designer, your town planner, all those other costs, your surveyor, they're all pretty set standard. And if you've got a good consultant network or you've made a few phone calls, you'll work out what those numbers are, and they're not going to change. It's just really, it's understanding the risks of resales and making sure that you ticked a few of those boxes on the fundamentals, and just stay away from sites that have got red flags on them, no matter how emotionally connected you might be on the street or the area, or your best mate lived 2 houses down. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because we can trick ourselves into buying anything, and especially when you've got the approval sitting there and you've got the deposit ready to go. I think people love to go and do that transaction and get that sugar hit, but you need to keep your powder dry, because there's always other sites.
Always.
And this is a long process. You'll be wedded to this site for a bit whilst you're working on the development. So get one that is as bulletproof as can be, because something will pop up and rock you that is unforeseeable. So let's make sure all the foreseen things are ticked off.
Never be too scared to walk away.
Yeah, plenty more. Couldn't agree more, Gav. So as far as the timeline goes, we've bought the site, you've done your due diligence, we've bought the site now, it's handing over to the projects team and they'll tackle the town planning approvals, they'll work with the client and the designer on design. Submission will happen, back and forth from council will occur, and then we'll get our town planning approval, which is super important for the subdivision stage. Yeah. So we get our town planning approval, and then we will engage our land surveyor who was there at the start, now to apply to council for our subdivision, which will get that subdivision process rolling. All your conditions are on a portal called Spear, and our project team or the individual playing along at home will work through those items in concurrently with the build. And then by the time you finish the build, the idea is that all those compliance items are finished. So you might be talking about your MBN being connected, your water being connected and getting a compliance statement from Melbourne Water. Council items are on there. There could be an open space contribution, Gav, that becomes a condition. So there's lots of different things in there, but you want to get onto that early. Yeah. So when you start the build, get your surveyor to apply to council and start working through your list. Super, super important. Obviously, you got your build and everything happening in the background, but that's not what today's about. Today's about the subdivision. And then once you have actually got your compliance from council, your statement of compliance, then at that time you can apply to the titles office to get your multiple titles. So essentially your titles office will turn one into however many you're applying for. Another little step in there, if there is a mortgage over the property, the first mortgage will hold the title. So a little fun bit that even though you get your statement of compliance from council, then your solicitor, who is the lodging party, needs to apply to your lender, usually a bank, to release the title for lodgement into the titles office, which can still take a couple of weeks. So why I'm harping on about this is getting all your compliance items done as quick as possible. Some councils, you can only be as quick as they allow you to be because there's certain things at the end of the process that they'll make you wait on. But if you can get as much done as possible, start the process of getting the title released, your solicitor, your lodging party lodging at the titles office taking their time, spitting out 2 titles. You need to get everything done as quick as possible because if you have made an off-the-plan sale, it'll be very important to have all this done so you can actually settle that, get the money off the buyer and pay down any debt or anything like that.
That's the hot tip, isn't it? It's to be organised with all of those items that you need to get for your subdivision and also for your planning permit conditions. And something that I've done on a couple of my projects is I've literally cut and paste every condition requirement from a town planning permit into a spreadsheet, and then I've got columns for who is it with at the time, dates, quotes, all that sort of thing, so that you literally got a spreadsheet that gives you a status of where all those items are, and you don't miss anything. Just things like getting crossovers in and things like that. Asset repair and footpaths and things like that. Getting quotes for that really early. Talking to the consultant or the contractor. When can you get it done? That sort of thing, because at that point of the project, you've got maximum out. So you're paying the maximum interest. So absolutely. So if it's very frustrating how 1 week can quickly turn into a month, which can turn into 6 weeks, and all of a sudden you're another $7,000 in interest payments. So
Nate's spot on.
Being organised for all that stuff and spreadsheets, they don't let you down.
Spreadsheets, you don't let you down, and also, which is in the masterclass, has ever been through that, but you follow up the follow-up. And a lot of these people you're potentially dealing with maybe don't owe you anything, and you do need to keep onto them and be nice and courteous and be memorable. So your job is in the mix, because if something, like you said, even as much as a footpath out the front is left and you think, she'll be right, mate, and then you think you've got to the end and they come and do an inspection and say, hey, footpath's not right, we're not releasing your statement of compliance, and now suddenly you need a concreter, you got lead time, they're going to quote, and they do the works, and you need to get council back out, bang, month gone. Like you said, another month's in holding. So anyway, follow up, but be diligent, ask questions, ask your builder, If you've got a development manager, you know, they'll be looking after it for you. But yeah, checking, because days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and that's money.
Yeah, you got to, I guess, with all of those consultants and contractors, is you want to be really nice, but you got to be firm.
Yeah, 100%. Firm but fair. And like I said, respectful, but you need to be onto it.
Yeah.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease type stuff.
That's it.
Awesome, Gav, mate. Thanks for the insights there. We've covered off on the values of subdividing, the risks of subdividing, and then even sprinkled through the process. But as far as subdivision goes and bringing value to single plots of land and turning them into multiples, we're still seeing great margins with them. And we can't help but think people that are buying this year, as time goes on, those margins are going to recalibrate and open back up. And they're the ones you want to be involved with, where the margin isn't that obvious because the land you'll get at a good price. And then as it opens up, you already got your foot in the door.
Look, most developments with subdivisions take 20 to 24 months, depending on how big it is and where it is and the council you're dealing with. So as we know, buying property, I think in the next 3 to 6 months is a good time to buy. So if you've got a project that's 20 to 24 months long, surely you're going to be going all right at the end.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Gav, thanks for coming in and thanks for catching up. We'll see you in a week or two.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, guys. Anyone that's going to get value out of that, please share that with them. And moral of the story, guys, let's subdivide, let's activate property, but speak to your professionals, do it right, maximise the outcome. Happy developing.